The moment I pulled up in that rental car, I could see my mother's face drop. My brother-in-law whispered something to my sister Sarah. They were already judging me. What they didn't know was that my actual car, a custom Tesla Model S, was parked at Peterson Space Force Base next to my Gulfstream. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story starts 6 months earlier at a funeral that changed everything. My name is Colonel Jennifer Hawk Morrison. But to my family, I was just Jenny, the daughter who wasted her potential by joining the military instead of going to law school like my sister Sarah or into finance like my brother Michael. When my grandfather, the only person who ever understood me, passed away last March, I flew home to Boston for the first time in 3 years. I'd been stationed overseas, running classified operations I still can't talk about. But my family didn't ask about my service. They asked why I was still just in the Air Force at 38. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At the reception, my mother actually said this, and I'll never forget it. Jennifer, your sister just made partner at her firm. Michael's hedge fund is managing $300 million. When are you going to do something with your life? I almost told her the truth right then. Almost. But my grandfather's lawyer pulled me aside with an envelope that would make everything more complicated. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandfather and the deed to his lake house in New Hampshire, the place where he'd taught me to fish, to shoot, to trust my instincts. The letter said I was the only one who'd ever understood what he valued, not the money or the status. The mission, the purpose. Knew what I'd become, even if the rest of the family didn't. He also left a challenge. He wanted me to bring the family together one last time at the lake house for a weekend. All of us. No excuses. And he wanted me to finally tell them the truth about my life. Inside that envelope was a handwritten letter from Grandpa Jack, a WWII bomber pilot who'd built a small aviation company after the war. He'd sold it in the 90s for what the family thought was a modest sum. Turns out modest was relative. The letter read, "Jenny, you're the only one who understood why I flew. The others see money, you see mission. The $8.3 million in the trust is yours, but there's a condition. Don't tell your family for 1 year. Let them show you who they really are." $8.3 million, and I couldn't say a word. I stood there in the lawyer's office, still in my dress uniform, reading those words over and over. My grandfather had always been unconventional, but this was something else entirely. He wanted me to witness my family's true nature without the filter of wealth, without them knowing I had anything they might want. The lawyer explained the terms, 12 months of silence. If I told anyone at all, the money would go to charity. My grandfather had set up a private investigator to monitor the situation, though I suspected that was a bluff. He trusted me to honor his wishes. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. As I walked out of that office and back to the reception, I could hear my mother holding court in the next room, explaining to the guests how concerned she was about my future, how I'd never settled down, never built anything lasting. That's when Sarah announced her engagement to Preston Whitmore IV and invited me to be her maid of honor. I should have said no. But what happened over the next 6 months taught me more about my family than 38 years ever had. The wedding planning became a masterclass in passive-aggressive wealth flexing. Every single interaction was a reminder that I was the poor sister. Sarah's dress, $15,000. She made sure to mention it cost more than your car, probably. Michael offered to loan me money for a bridesmaid dress. My mother suggested I could save up for their engagement gift. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been promoted to full colonel at 36, one of the youngest in Air Force history. My annual salary plus flight pay plus hazard pay from combat deployments, over $180,000. I owned my home on base outright. I had zero debt. And now I had $8.3 million I couldn't touch or mention, so I played along. I became poor Jenny at every bridal shower, every family dinner, every venue tour where Sarah picked the most expensive everything while shooting me sympathetic looks. The bridal shower was particularly brutal. Sarah's friends, all trust fund babies and corporate wives, asked what I did for a living with that tone. You know the one. When I said Air Force, one of them actually patted my hand and said, "Well, thank you for your service, that's so brave," like I'd just told her I volunteered at a soup kitchen. My mother kept apologizing for my situation to the other guests. My situation, like serving my country, was something embarrassing, like leading missions that saved lives was somehow less valuable than pushing papers in a law firm. Sarah registered for China that cost more per plate than most people's monthly rent. She picked a venue that required a $50,000 minimum, and every single decision came with a comment about how she wished I could afford to do something like this someday. I smiled. I nodded. I took notes in my little bargain store notebook while they sipped champagne that cost more per bottle than my flight suit. Then came the engagement party, and Preston's innocent question that detonated everything. But first, let me tell you what they didn't see during those 6 months, because that's when the real story was happening. Every time I left a family obligation, I'd drive my rental car back to Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. I'd drop off the Corolla, walk across the tarmac, and get into my actual vehicle. See, when you're a colonel commanding cyber warfare operations and you've done 3 tours in undisclosed locations, you accumulate certain resources. My Tesla wasn't flashy, it was practical. The Gulfstream G150 wasn't mine technically. It was registered to a shell company I'd set up for a specific purpose I'll explain later. But I had unlimited access. Why did I have a private jet? That's actually a funny story involving a favor I did for a defense contractor CEO whose daughter I rescued during an embassy evacuation in Yemen. But that's another video. The point is, my life existed in 2 completely separate universes. In one universe, I was poor Jenny, the family disappointment who couldn't afford a decent bridesmaid dress. In the other, I was Colonel Morrison, who had security clearances so high that even saying their classification level was classified. I'd leave Sarah's bridal brunches and fly directly to briefings at the Pentagon. I'd endure my mother's lectures about financial responsibility, then board a jet to consult on satellite defense systems. My brother Michael would explain basic investing to me like I was a child, and I'd nod politely, not mentioning that my portfolio, managed by the same firm that handles government officials, had outperformed his hedge fund by 17% over the past 3 years. The cognitive dissonance was almost funny. Almost. But here's what made it bearable. I was watching them. Really watching them, seeing how they treated someone they perceived as beneath them, someone they thought had nothing to offer. And with each condescending comment, each pitying look, each offer of help that was really just a flex, I understood exactly what my grandfather had wanted me to see. He'd spent his whole life around people who measured worth in dollars. He wanted me to see if my family was any different. They weren't. What matters is this: while my family pitied poor Jenny, I was literally flying over their heads. And I was about to use every resource at my disposal, not for revenge, but for something bigger than they could imagine. Here's what I was actually doing during those 6 months. Grandpa Jack's letter had a second page, a page that explained why he left me the money and what he hoped I'd do with it. Jenny, it said, I've watched veterans from my war, from Korea, from Vietnam, from your wars, come home broken, not just physically, financially. The VA fails them. The system fails them. You have the mind, the rank, and the connections to fix what I couldn't. Build something that lasts. So I did. Using his $8.3 million, my own savings, and connections I'd built over 20 years in service, I established the Jack Morrison Veterans Housing Initiative. We bought foreclosed properties in Colorado Springs, renovated them, and provided rent-free housing for homeless veterans transitioning back to civilian life. 6 months, 17 properties, 83 veterans off the streets, and I hadn't told anyone. The work was intense. I'd coordinate property acquisitions between family dinners. I'd interview contractors while sitting in the parking lot of Sarah's wedding venue. I'd approve renovation budgets on my phone while my mother lectured me about career advancement. Every property had to be vetted. Every veteran had to be screened, not to keep anyone out, but to make sure we could provide the right support services. We partnered with local mental health clinics, job placement programs, educational resources. This wasn't just about putting roofs over heads. It was about rebuilding lives. I hired a former Marine logistics officer as executive director. We brought in a Navy corpsman to run health services coordination. An Army chaplain handled counseling referrals. It was a military operation, run with military precision, funded by military money, serving military people. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family debated whether to spend $12,000 or $15,000 on wedding flowers, I was deciding whether to buy a 4-unit apartment building or 2 duplexes. While Sarah agonized over invitation fonts, I was signing lease agreements that would change people's lives. I met every single veteran personally, shook their hands, heard their stories. A lot of them had served under officers like me. Some had been to the same places I'd been, seen the same things I'd seen, and now they were sleeping in shelters or their cars, fighting a different kind of war on American streets. My grandfather was right. The system had failed them, but we were building something better. Why not tell anyone? Because I needed to know it would work. Because I'd seen too many military charities that were just tax shelters. Because my grandfather taught me, prove it works, then talk about it. But at Sarah's engagement party, the secret was about to come out in the worst possible way. I need to be honest about something. Playing poor Jenny wasn't entirely selfless. Part of me wanted to see if my family loved me, or loved what I could do for them. Grandpa Jack knew what he was doing with that one-year condition. He was testing them, and me. Every time Michael offered to help with money, I wondered, would you offer if you knew I didn't need it? Every time my mother sighed about my modest lifestyle, I thought, would you respect my choices if they came with a portfolio? And every time Sarah showed off Preston's wealth, his family's real estate empire, his Harvard MBA, his beach house in the Hamptons, I wondered, does she even know what wealth really means? Because here's what I'd learned in 20 years of military service. Real wealth isn't money. It's trust. It's brothers and sisters in arms who will run into fire for you. It's the veteran who got his first good night's sleep in a decade because he finally had a safe place to live. Preston seemed like a decent guy, honestly. He was polite to me, never condescending. But his world was so disconnected from reality that he couldn't even see it. He'd never struggled, never had to choose between paying rent and eating, never watched friends die for something bigger than themselves. My family had become the same way. They'd forgotten or maybe never knew what actually mattered. I started keeping a mental list during those 6 months, every slight, every assumption. Every moment when they revealed who they really were when they thought I had nothing. My mother introducing me to her friends. This is Jennifer, she's in the military, we're very proud, but she's had such a difficult time financially. Michael at a family dinner. Jenny, have you thought about getting a civilian job? You could probably make decent money with your security clearance. I could make some calls. Sarah trying on wedding dresses. You're so lucky you don't have to worry about all this expensive stuff. Simple is good too. Each comment was a data point, each pitying look was evidence, and my grandfather's test was working exactly as he'd planned. But I was about to learn whether my birth family understood what real wealth meant. The engagement party was at Preston's family estate. 300 guests, ice sculptures, a live orchestra, and me in a $200 dress I'd bought specifically to look appropriate for my budget. I walked in thinking I'd survive 2 hours of small talk. I had no idea Preston's best man was about to recognize me. His name was Captain Bradley Chen. We'd flown together on a joint operation in Syria 4 years ago. He was Air Force Special Operations. I was providing cyber support for his team's insertion. He'd since left the military and was working in Preston's family business. And apparently he'd been telling Preston stories about his crazy Air Force days for months. As I stood at the champagne table trying to be invisible, I heard Preston's voice behind me. Brad keeps talking about this legendary colonel named Hawk who saved his entire team when their comms went dark. Says she's the smartest officer he's ever worked with. Don't suppose you know any colonels named Hawk? He was making small talk. Friendly conversation with his future sister-in-law. I turned around, saw Brad's face go white with recognition, and had exactly 2 seconds to decide. Keep lying or let it all burn down. The champagne glass in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. Brad was frozen, clearly calculating whether to blow my cover or play along. Preston was smiling, oblivious, waiting for my answer. And across the room, I could see Sarah laughing with her bridesmaids, my mother holding court with Preston's parents, Michael networking with the other wealthy guests. They had no idea what was about to happen. I looked at Brad. I looked at Preston. I thought about my grandfather's letter, about the year of silence that was supposed to teach me something, about the veterans sleeping in warm beds because of choices I'd made while my family pitied me. And I made a decision. I chose option 3, the one Grandpa Jack would have wanted. What I said next didn't just shock the engagement party, it changed my family forever. But the real revelation. That came from what happened in the 24 hours after. I looked Preston in the eye and said, I am Colonel Hawk, and yes, I know Brad. We flew together over Raqqa in 2021. You could have heard a pin drop. Sarah's face went from confused to mortified. My mother literally clutched her pearls. Michael's mouth fell open. But Preston started laughing, not mocking, genuine, delighted laughter. Wait, he said, you're telling me the sister Sarah keeps apologizing for the one she said works, just a simple military job, is a decorated Air Force colonel. Brad, is this the Hawk? Brad stepped forward, and what he said next was perfect. Sir, with all respect to your family, Colonel Morrison has more medals than most generals. She's run operations that'll be classified for the next 50 years. She's forgotten more about leadership than most business executives ever learn. And he paused, looking at me with genuine affection. She once landed a damaged C-130 in a sandstorm with no instruments because 8 wounded soldiers needed to get home. The silence was deafening. I could see the gears turning in everyone's heads. Guests were staring. Preston's parents looked confused. Sarah's bridesmaids were whispering. And my family looked like they'd been slapped. Sarah found her voice first. Jenny, why didn't you ever tell us? And that's when it all came out. Not angry, not vengeful, just honest. I tried to tell you, Sarah, at every family dinner, every phone call, but you were always too busy explaining how expensive things were, how much you earned, how successful you become. You never once asked what I actually did. You just decided I was poor because I didn't drive a Mercedes. My mother tried to interrupt, but I was on a roll. Grandpa Jack left me $8.3 million $6 months ago. He made me promise not to tell you for a year. He wanted to see if you'd love me without knowing what I had. You failed that test, every single one of you. Michael looked like he'd been punched. 8 million, and you've been driving that rental car. I've been building something that matters, Michael. While you were managing money for people who already have too much, I was getting veterans off the streets. 17 properties, 83 people who served this country now have homes. But what I said next, that's what really changed everything. I took that $8.3 million, I told them, and I built something Grandpa would have been proud of. 83 veterans, men and women who served this country and came home to nothing, now have homes, rent-free, for as long as they need them. Real wealth isn't what you display, it's what you do when no one's watching. The room was dead silent, but then something unexpected happened. Preston stepped forward and said, "How much more money do you need?" I blinked. "Excuse me. For the housing initiative, how much more could you use? Because my family foundation has been looking for veteran-focused programs that actually work. Most are garbage, overhead heavy, impact light. But if you've housed 83 people in 6 months with $8 million, he pulled out his phone, actually calculating. That's roughly $96,000 per person for full renovation and setup. That's incredibly efficient. What could you do with $50 million? I nearly dropped my champagne glass. Preston wasn't mocking me. He wasn't trying to one-up me. He was genuinely interested. This man, who I'd assumed was just another trust fund kid, was seeing the mission. He understood what we'd built. With 50 million, I said slowly, my mind racing. We could expand to every major military base in the country. We could house over 500 veterans. We could build job training centers, mental health facilities, family support services. Send me your business plan, Preston said. Monday morning, my family's foundation board meets next month. But Sarah's response, that's what broke my heart. She started crying, not angry tears, ashamed tears. I spent $15,000 on a dress I'll wear once, she whispered. You housed 83 people. Jenny, I'm so sorry. I've been so awful to you. And that's when I realized this wasn't about punishing them. Grandpa Jack's test wasn't about whether they passed or failed. It was about giving them the chance to see who they'd become and choose to be better. Sarah, I said, I don't need an apology. I need a sister who asks about my life, who cares about the mission, not the money. Can you do that? She nodded, mascara running. Can I volunteer? At the housing project. You want to volunteer? I'm a lawyer. You probably need legal help with contracts, zoning, tenant agreements. Let me help. Please, let me actually help. What happened in the next 6 months changed not just my family, but the entire veteran community in Colorado Springs. Preston's family foundation invested $50 million. Sarah quit her corporate law job and became the initiative's legal director, pro bono. Michael, surprisingly, restructured his hedge fund to create a special investment vehicle that generates sustainable funding for veteran programs. Even my mother got involved, organizing fundraising galas with her society friends. But here's what changed. Now she introduces me as my daughter, the colonel who runs the Morrison Veterans Initiative, not my daughter who's in the military. We've now housed 847 veterans across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. 42 of them have started their own businesses. 18 went back to school. 3 work for the initiative full-time. But the real measure of success, last month a 56-year-old Marine Corps veteran named Thomas Wright, who'd been homeless for 8 years after his marriage fell apart following his 3rd deployment, walked into my office. He'd been living in one of our homes for 9 months. Colonel, he said, I got a job, a real job with benefits. I'm ready to give up my spot. There's another vet who needs it more, but I wanted to thank you. You gave me back my dignity. That's wealth. That's what Grandpa Jack understood. Oh, and about that Gulfstream Brad mentioned, that defense contractor CEO now donates free flight hours to transport disabled veterans to medical appointments across the country. Last year alone, 2,847 flights. Medical transportation worth $4.2 million. As for my family, we're not perfect. Sarah still sometimes catches herself comparing costs, then stops and apologizes. Michael still thinks his hedge fund is cooler than my housing initiative, but now he funds it, so I'll allow it. And my mother, she recently told me she's proud of me, not for my rank, not for my money, for my mission. That took 38 years, but it was worth the wait. The wedding, by the way, was beautiful. Sarah and Preston got married at a veterans hall instead of the country club. They donated what would have been the venue cost to the initiative. Preston's groomsmen were half Ivy League friends, half combat veterans Brad had served with. My bridesmaid dress cost $200. I wore it with pride. One last thing, remember that rental car I drove to the engagement party? The Toyota Corolla that started this whole mess. I still have it. I kept it as a reminder the car doesn't make the person. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The money doesn't make the mission. But you know what does make the mission? Showing up, doing the work, caring more about impact than image. Grandpa Jack taught me that, and now through 847 veterans and counting, I'm teaching it forward. My family mocked me for being poor. Turns out I was rich in the only ways that actually matter. And I've got the fleet of renovated homes and the hundreds of changed lives to prove it. Next time someone judges you by what you drive or where you live, remember, the quietest people in the room are often carrying the biggest missions. And that's a lesson my family learned the hard way.